All right, welcome everybody to the fourth and final installment of our series with Miriam Zami, our Emerging Scholar Fellow. This has been an amazing learning experience for me, and I hope for many of you as well. And I'm really excited to hear, to learn some more with Miriam and engage. So welcome everybody, and welcome to those of you who are new, and you're in for a treat, I think. And of course, welcome to everybody who made the effort to come out once more, especially on a day when it's time changing, and especially to Miriam who came from New York this morning with the time change. And I also want to welcome our mentor for this session, which is Vivi Pukopatenik, who came all the way from Seattle to be here and mentor Miriam through this class. The only other things I have to mention are that this has been, from Mayan's perspective, I think this has been a very successful project in this inaugural year, and we are moving forward with a second year. So stay tuned for information about what's coming for next year. And thank you to the donors who helped make this whole thing possible. And with no further ado, I'm excited to learn with you once again.
Great, thank you. So wonderful to be here. And like Angela said, thank you for coming out on clocks changing morning, and I know those who schlepped to Sharon. I'm very excited to be here for our fourth learning session together, and I hope to sort of close up some of the things we've discussed for those of you who have been with me for the last 3 sessions, but also talk about some new things. And and actually with Purim last week, I think that this is very fitting, although I know all of us are already on, Pesach, so we already forgot that it was just a few days ago. But try to keep that spirit, the humor and the joy alive a little bit longer for this, and then we can work to cleaning our kitchens. So in this class, what I want to talk about, how the rabbis talk about laughter. So while we spent a lot of time in the last 3 sessions, we've spoken about when the rabbis sort of do laughter, when they laugh, when they use humor, how they incorporate it into their study, how they use it in their interpersonal relationships. But we haven't looked as much as what the rabbis actually say about laughter and humor and their programmatic statements about it. And part of that is how they project these ideas onto the future and onto God. So what role does laughter and humor play in the ultimate scheme of Jewish history and Jewish morality? And we spoke about this a little bit in the first class, if you remember. We spoke a little bit about, existential uncertainty and laughter's role in that. So I kind of want to bridge that all the way now in this last class. So for those of you who were here for the last few classes, and even if you weren't, I just want to start off with, to get some feelings and ideas about what do you think now, having either listened to me for 3 hours or having not, what would you say is the rabbis or Judaism's view of laughter? When is it important? When is it not important? Are they pro? Are they con? Just take like 30 seconds, think about it, and then we'll take a few suggestions.
I want to say pro, but in very specific situations.
Very specific, and in what kind of specific situations?
I guess, some like purposeful laughter.
Purposeful.
Like either, joy at, some sort of godly,
Right.
Prophecy coming true, like expressing joy in a sort of holy way.
In a holy, sanctified, religious
yes,
sense. Right, okay. Joy in that way. Yeah.
It also, it diffuses certain tense situations.
Yeah.
And deflates egos of people who think that they're so wonderful.
Right, so even interpersonally we saw, right, how laughter can mediate in that way. Yeah, is there a hand back there?
I was going to say to relieve the tension.
Yeah. The tension between?
Either between God and the people, or between prophets or leaders and God and the people.
Right.
also kind of to make fun of certain situations and to kind of, it's almost like, I don't know, I told you so, or I showed you so, or making fun of it and making light of it.
Right, and remember we did that whole session on mockery and how the rabbis sort of make fun of each other, which was a little bit disconcerting sometimes, but they do it, right? And mockery is really a part of it, yeah.
Yeah, having sat through your various classes, like my thought on this fourth one is like laughter is, it's almost like language. It's like, are you pro or are you against? Well, it turns out when you start to think about it, it's so vast and multifaceted and can be used in so many like positive and negative ways and intimate ways and distancing ways that it's almost like hard to talk about it. You've convinced me that it's not even like we need subcategories.
Yeah, it's good. I did such a good job. I can't even ask. Is it pro or con? It's good.
The question is moot.
The question is moot. Good. That's great. I'm so happy that you all, are already grappling with it, and you have this tension and you have this complexity, because surprise, we're going to see more of that. We're going to see more of that tension, that complexity. There is no yes or no. There's no pro or con. There's a lot of complexity to it. But we will actually see some more clearly programmatic statements about laughter, which will be interesting. And I want us to think about that. And one other thing before we just get into the sources, a lot of the sources we're going to look at today are a little bit different than what we've looked at previously, in that these sources come from midrash. So they don't necessarily come from the Talmud that you would just open up any masecha and it's there. They come from midrash rabbah or other midrashim. And I want you to keep this in mind because often these classical midrashim reflect rabbis' speeches or drashot during holidays or Shabbat. It's not necessarily, a straight copy, but often they take their notes, and this is sort of what they came into. They became midrash. And I want you to keep that in mind because if this is a drasha, let's say, that the rabbi is saying in shul, it's a sermon that the rabbi is saying in the synagogue, in the 4th century of the Common Era in the land of Israel, what does that tell you about the audience? What does that tell you about their circumstance? You think about this today when the rabbi gives a drasha. Like how does it speak to what's going on in the time? So I'll point out specifically when we're going through a midrash, but when we do, I want you to have that in the back of your minds. What is the setting of this, the social setting, the literary setting of these texts? Okay, great. With all of that, let's jump into the text. So the first few texts that I want to look at talk about laughter in the world to come, specifically laughter in the future. And a lot of these midrashim are drawn from these few verses in Tehillim. These are very familiar verses to a lot of us. Shir HaMa'alot, Beshuv Hashem et Shivat Zion, Hayinu Kecholmim, a song of ascents. When the Lord restores the fortunes of Sion, we see it as if in a dream. Az yimaleh sechok pinu eleshonenu rina, az yomru bagoyim, higdil Hashem la'asot im ele, higdil Hashem la'asot imanu, hayinu semechim. Our mouths shall be filled with laughter, our tongues with songs of joy. Then they shall say among the nations, the Lord has done great things for them. The Lord will do great things for us, and we shall rejoice. So already Tehillim really expresses this idea of, in the future redemption, we will have laughter. Then that is when we will be filled with joy. The rabbis are going to take this to mean only in the future. Only in the future can we have laughter. So let's look at that. In Echa Rabbah, this is one of those midrashim, right? It's a midrash on the book of Echa, on Lamentations. In a matter that Israel sinned, they were punished with that, and they were comforted with that. So it's an extended midah keneged midah, right? They sinned with something, they were punished with that same thing, and then they'll be comforted with that. So they give an example. They sinned with the mouth, as it says in Yeshaya, every mouth speaks depravity. And they were punished with the mouth. As it also says in Yeshaya, they consumed Israel with every mouth. And they are comforted with the mouth, as it says, Az yimaleh sechok pinu. They are also comforted with the mouth, as it says in this verse in Tehillim. Then their mouths will be filled with laughter. Here, laughter really signifies redemption. This is what it means to be comforted, to have that in the future. That is what God will grant Israel. In the next source, we have a very similar idea. This is in the Mechilta de Rabbi Yishmael. It's a comment on Az Yashir Moshe. This is source 3. The song that Moshe sings coming out of Egypt. And it describes, Yesh Az l'she'avar, v'yesh Az la'atid labo. There are Az, then Moshe saying, Az Yashir Moshe. As, there is an as for the future, and there's as for the past. And it goes through a whole bunch of different examples. I just want you to skip to the last one. Az yimaleh sechok pinu. Az yomru bagoyim. Hare elu le'atid. These are the ones that are designated specifically for the future. This is not something that's going to happen right now, the rabbis are saying. This is for the future. Now, so far, they haven't said only the future, but they've said, this is pretty much for the future. Like, we get the feeling that it's probably only for the future, but maybe we can have laughter now. But Rabbi Yochanan is going to come to tell you that you really can't. So if you look at source 4, this comes from Barachot. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Mishum Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, Asur le'adam shimaleh sechok piv ba'olam hazeh, shene'emar, az yimaleh sechok pinu eleshonenu rina. So what does Rabbi Yochanan say? Rabbi Yochanan says in the name of Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, a person is not allowed to fill his mouth with laughter in this world, because it says in the Pesukim of Tehillim, which we just read, when the Lord returns the captivity of Zion, we will be as dreamers. And only then, az yimaleh sechok pinu, only then will our mouths be filled with laughter. Ematai, so when will this era arise? Bizman she'omru bagoyim higdil Hashem lasatim eleh. In the time when, they quote the rest of the verse, they will say among the nations, the Lord has done great things. Meaning, when all the rest of the nations recognize God's power. So what time is this? Mashiach, right? Somebody said redemption, future. Not now. That's what they're saying. Amru alav al Reish Lakish shemiyamav lo mileh sechok piv ba'olam hazeh. Miki shim'eh merabi Yochanan Rabbeh. What do they say? Reish Lakish never laughed in this world because of this statement when he learned it from his teacher Rabbi Yochanan. Reish Lakish never laughed. He really took it to the extreme. Reish Lakish, keep in mind, what time period is he living in? The Tanaitic period. They're living under Roman rule. They're going through, this is the time around a little after the Bar Kokhba rebellion. There's a lot of negativity and persecution around them. They're living in the depths of despair right now. He never laughed. Now, just as a thought experiment, do you think he really never laughed?
No.
Yeah.
I mean, just looking at the phrasing, lo mileh sechok piv, his mouth is not full of laughter, which makes me think of, honestly, baking the glass under the chuppah.
Right.
In any situation, there's going to be that one little thing that.
And it's great that you brought that up because that comes right before this text on the page. Really, they're like they were partying too much. They broke a glass at the wedding. Like that's where it started. Yes, exactly. There's always that sense that we can be happy, but not too happy. Any other?
Well,
Yeah.
I just love that idea. But I've been also thinking in my head about Rabbi Akiva when we talked about it in the first class.
Yes.
That's Rabbi Akiva Dafka did laugh.
Dafka does laugh. Yes, Rabbi Akiva is, he's I would say the odd one out, but he's the inspiring one. This is why the Talmud loves him, right? He has that in him. Actually, he's going to come up again in our next source. But is there any other comments or questions so far? Yeah, sure.
I do this trivia quiz online, and one of the questions is, how many times a day does the average person laugh? And I think the answer is 7.
Oh, really? Okay. 7 is pretty good, I would say. Great. So Rabbi Akiva. Now, the next couple of sources talk about the laughter of the righteous. So we just ended saying, well, laughter is only for the future. It's only for the world to come. But what about the really good people? Maybe they can laugh in this world. Maybe the tzaddikim, maybe they're allowed to laugh in this world. Do they merit laughter? So let's see what the sources say. So in the Yerushalmi, we have this really interesting story about the family of Avtinus, which is a priestly family, a family of Kohanim, and they, during the time of the Beit HaMikdash, they would be the ones to supply the herbs for the Ketoret. It's really interesting because we never really think about, who does what job in the Beit HaMikdash. It just is there. But this family, they were the ones who knew the recipe. They had the secret recipe. They never told it to anybody. They would be the ones to collect the herbs and create the spice mixture. So Rabbi Akiva says this story. Amar Rabbi Akiva, Sachli Shimon ben Luka. So Shimon ben Luka told me, Melaket hayiti asavim ani v'tinok echad mibet Avtinas. I was collecting herbs, me and this kid from the house of Avtinas. Now this is, way after the Bet Mikdash is destroyed. V'ra'iti oto shebacha, v'ra'iti oto shesachak. I saw him crying and I saw him laughing. At the same time, one right after the other. I don't know. Amarti lo, bini, lama bachita. I said to him, my son, why are you crying? Amarli al kevod bet ava shnitma'et. On the prestige, the honor of my family that has been diminished. The temple is no longer standing. They no longer have their job, their family tradition. This herb, this is what made them in the Jewish community. They didn't have that anymore. V'lama sakakta. Amarli al hakavod hamitukan letzadikim la'atid lavo. I am laughing over the glory, over the kavod that will be prepared for the tzadikim in the future. That is what I'm laughing about the future joy that's going to come back to my family. I'll pause there, and then they talk about the herbs and what's in the mixture, and he says, I can't tell you. But Rabbi Akiva says this story about somebody who sees this person crying and laughing. And I'm glad you brought that up, Deborah, about the first class, because it reminded me, where did Rabbi Akiva get this idea from? Crying and laughing, this juxtaposition. Very similar thing going on here. Some are crying and some are laughing. Different attitudes towards the same event. The temple is destroyed. They no longer have that. But here, what's the laughter? What is the laughter? What's the purpose of the laughter here? It's not to say that, tomorrow it'll be okay. It's to say that ultimately, in the future, it'll be okay. So can the righteous laugh in this world? Can they experience true joy in this world? What do you think? Based on this source and what we've read so far?
In anticipation of the ultimate.
Right. Only in anticipation. Only if you have your mind set that it's for the future. It's kind of this laughter is the confidence. The confidence that it's going to be good, but not necessarily tomorrow.
And that's Rabbi Akiva as well. That's what we learned about Rabbi Akiva.
Right. That's also what we learned about Rabbi Akiva. It's going to come, right? We're going, and he quotes the Pesukim, we're going to receive the ultimate redemption, and that's why I'm allowed to laugh. That's really the only reason why. And this idea continues in Shabbat. And there's this whole discussion about Kohelet, about the book of Kohelet. Now, if anybody is familiar with the discussion in the Talmud about the book of Kohelet, the rabbis are not so into the book because it's really, there's a lot going on in it. There's a lot of grappling with existential anxiety. So they go through a whole bunch of situations in which the Pesukim in Kohelet contradict each other. So they give one example. Umay dvarav sotrin ze et ze, diktiv tov kas mischok, diktiv lischok amarti meholal. So it says in one pasuk, anger is better than laughter, but it says in another pasuk, I said of laughter, it is praiseworthy. This pasuk is going to come back in a few sources, so keep it in mind. Uktiv, v'shabachti ani et simcha, uktiv, u'simcha ma zo osa. And it also says, I praise joy in one pasuk, and in another pasuk it says, and joy, what does it accomplish? So what's the deal, Kohelet? Is joy good or is joy not good? What we don't know, we can't understand. How could this be in Tanakh? So they ask, what do we do with these stirot? Lo kashya, no, it's not an issue. Tov ka'as mischok, tov ka'as sheko'es hakadosh baruch hu im hatzadikim ba'olam hazeh, min haschok shesochek im harasha'im ba'olam hazeh. No, anger is better than laughter. That means that the anger that God directs at the righteous in this world is better than the laughter that he laughs with the wicked in this world. That's why anger is better than laughter. Because anger at good people is better than laughter at bad people. Okay, we'll unpack that. U'lischok amarti meholal, tov sechok shesochek hakadosh baruch hu im hazadikim le'olam haba, mikol shebach v'gdola shenoten l'rasha'im ba'olam hazeh. The laughter which God laughs with the righteous in the world to come is better than any praise and greatness that he gives to the wicked in this world. So we interpret Kohelet to make coherent sense by saying that anything that the righteous get in this world is going to be better in the world to come. And anything that the wicked get in this world, it's going to be bad in the world to come. Now, what does this mean? What do you think? Does this strike you, this idea that God laughs with the wicked in this world? What do you think that means?
Or Shabbatoplo. In other words, it's a way to deal with the fact
Yes,
that there are all these
right.
wicked people and
Right.
that they're having a good life.
So this idea of God laughing with the wicked is kind of as if to say, right, Rasha v'Tovlo, that he gets, that the Rashaim get good in this world. Right. It's a very, I wouldn't call it simple, it's obviously a complex idea, but it's the simple idea that God gives bad people good things, but in the future, God will give good people good things. That's sort of the theology that the Bavli over here is trying to work out. Yeah.
I just want to mention there are very few people in the world that are all good or all bad.
Yeah.
So my understanding of that, of God laughs with the good that He gives to the wicked, it's, the wicked aren't completely wicked. They do have some good qualities. So that laughter and that good that they get in this world is a reward for the good qualities that they exhibit in this world. But if they're mostly wicked, then they'll receive the punishment in the next world.
Great, I love that. I think that that's so important to raise that, right, people are not all good or all bad. Why do you think the rabbis use terms that are so black and white, they're so stark? Yeah.
I just also want to point out, it first talks about the anger directed at the righteous, because the righteous are also not all good, so they mess up on occasion too. So
Sure.
that is why they have to deal with the anger in this world, because that way they can reserve the reward in the next world.
Right. So the rabbis have this theology that the righteous will suffer in this world, and therefore they won't have to suffer in the world to come. Whereas the wicked don't suffer in this world, and they'll suffer in the world to come. Now, whether or not, that's our experience in 2023, I can't say. But the rabbis find this to be a very helpful, maybe a coping mechanism or a way to look at the world amidst sort of what we discussed, like living among the non-Jews, like in the ancient world, where they, didn't have the kind of life that they were hoping for. The Beis Mikdash was destroyed. This was something to help them get them through, right? It was a way to connect to God, to project their hopes onto the future. Now this idea, so far we've said laughter and joy really seem like it's reserved for the world to come. Even in the next source, in Ta'anit, I won't read it inside, but there's this idea, and it's actually very beautiful. This is the very last few lines of the Masechet. So if anybody did Daf Yomi, like way back when, this is the very end of the Masechet, that God will arrange a dance for the tzaddikim in Olam Haba, and God will dance in the middle of this circle of tzaddikim. It's very provocative. It's a very beautiful image, I think, of God dancing with the tzaddikim, but only in Olam Haba, not here, in the world to come, in the future. The laughter, joy, ultimate happiness, that's for the future. And even for the righteous, that's for the future. That's not necessarily for here. Now, this isn't like the most comforting message, but I think that there is more nuance to it, and I think there's a little bit more complexity. If laughter is only reserved for the world to come, where is laughter in this world? Who gets to laugh in this world? That's what I want to explore in the next section. I want to look at the first text together, and then we'll do the next source 9 in the Chavruta. So let's look at source 8. This comes from Eicha Rabbah. Now we looked at Eicha Rabbah already, and we talked about Eicha as really one of those texts that explore. It's Eicha. We read it on Tisha B'Av. It explores tragedy. It explores what it means to live in suffering. It's one of those, really, it's hard to read. And Kohelet is like that also. So these are the two texts that we're going to be working with in these sources. And remember, I'm going to remind you what we talked about in the beginning. These are midrash, which means that these probably reflect a drasha. This reflects a sermon that a rabbi gave. So think about that. How would this be a helpful sermon? Okay, now let's get into it. Hayiti tzchok l'chol ami u'neginatam kol hayom. I have become a laughing stock to all people, the subject of their song all day long. This is from Eicha. Hayiti tzchok l'chol ami, ketib, yasichu bi yoshvei sha'ar, elu umat ha'olam, shehen yoshvim b'bateh tartiyot u'b'bateh karkasiyot. These are, so they explain the first half of the pasuk, I have become a laughing stock to all my people, and they connect it with another pasuk from Tehillim. Those who sit in the gate talk about me. And who are these people? These are the nations of the world who sit in their tartiyot and karkasiyot. Can anybody guess what that is? Theaters and circuses. Greek words. The nations of the world, they sit in their theaters and their circuses. And now the second half of the pasuk, uneginot shote shechar, me'achar shehen yoshvin ve'ochlim v'shotin u'mishtatrin, hen yoshvin u'mesichin bi u'mal'igim bi, ve'omrim bagin de lo nitzroch lecharova ki huda'eh, ve'hen omrim elu le'elu, kama shanim at ba'eh mecheh, ve'hen omrim kechalukad Yehudeh t'shabata. So what is this? The second half of the pasuk in Tehillim. I am the subject of their songs by the ale drinkers, by the drinkers. They drink and they sing about me. After they sit and eat and drink and become intoxicated, what do? These non-Jews? They sit and speak about me and they mock me and they say so that we will not need to eat carobs like the Jews, or in the Aramaic it's Delon Yisroch lecharoba ki hudaeh. So charoba are carobs and they might be poor people's food. But I think that also it's saying that we will not have to be charoba destroyed like the Jews. Charuv, that we're not going to be the chorban. We're not going to be destroyed like the Jews. Look at those Jews. And then I didn't bring the rest of the Aramaic translation. They make fun of Shabbat. They say they're lazy, they don't come on Shabbat. They make fun of all these different things about the Jews. This is what the midrash is saying the non-Jews do. Who gets to laugh? The non-Jews. And what are they laughing at? The Jews. Right. They're laughing at the Jews. And where are they doing it? In their theaters and circuses. That, for the rabbi, is the symbol of entertainment and base entertainment. And that is where all the bad things happen. That is where they drink and they make fun and they talk. That, in this world, that's who gets to laugh. It's the non-Jews in their theaters and circuses. Now let's finish up this midrash. In contrast to the non-Jews who are sitting in their theaters and circuses and laughing, what does it say? דבר אחר, יסיחו ביושבי שער, אלה ישראל, שהם יושבים בבתי כנסיות ובבתי מדרשות, ונגינות שותי שחר, מאחר שהן יושבים ואוכלים ושותים ומשתכרים בסעודת תשעה באב, יושבים וקוראים קינות ונהי באיכה. So now they're going to give another explanation. Those who sit at the gate talk about me. Who is this? This is not the non-Jews. This is Israel. They sit not in their theaters and circuses. They sit in their synagogues and their batei midrash, in their study halls. And I am the subject of their song. They're eating and drinking, and they're having a meal, but they're not doing that to make fun of the Jews. They sit and eat and drink and become intoxicated at what meal? At the meal before Tisha B'Av. And then as soon as they finish, they sit and recite the Lamentations, and they cry in Echa. It's a very stark image. We have the Gentiles, and this was probably happening in Caesarea, like in the land of Israel. Down the block, there's the non-Jews sitting in their theaters and circuses, laughing and, watching gladiators, whatever they're watching, laughing and making fun of the Jews. And then down the block, in the Beit Midrash, there's the Jews crying over their temple that's destroyed. It's a very stark image. It's very hard for the Jews to be grappling with this. Now I said that keep in mind that this is a midrash that was probably, we call it homiletical, that it was probably oral. They probably said this as a drasha, as a sermon. What do you think this does for the Jews hearing this? Do you think this is a message of hope, or what do you think the rabbi's aim was in saying this message?
It's a warning.
It's a warning. Say more.
Well, it's saying this is one culture, this is the other culture. If you engage, you should not be engaging in this culture, which is so foreign and which is so not just foreign, but its values are not our values.
Right.
And here is the other side. Which this is our people. These are our values.
Right.
This is the way you should be thinking.
Right. It's really
Don't go down to that.
don't go down that route. Good. Other ideas? What is the rabbi thinking? What are the people listening? If you're a 4th century Jew listening to this, what would you be thinking?
Well, in spite of I go in agreement with what Deborah said, that this other culture, it's not a neutral ground. They're bad. They're not. It's not. Oh, let's go have fun.
Yeah.
It's not fun. It's evil.
Yeah.
Is what they're saying. And
Right.
in spite of the fact that yes, we are here mourning, it's because we have something to mourn that, that we're trying to get back to.
Right, right.
Yeah, I feel that way too, of like the sort of dual calendar life, which is how I feel a lot of the time, where like you're going to shul on Yom Kippur and you walk in, everyone else is having a totally normal day,
Right.
like it's no big deal.
Right.
I feel like it's just bringing that to the fore of you're
Yeah.
living in a world where you are this small group, but you still have this connection that others can't see.
Right.
And that seems to sort of emphasize that point, even if it's kind of a depressing one. Like, I feel like it would be more fun to have this on, like, you get to go sit in a sukkah and life is great,
Yeah.
instead of, like, you're sitting in mourning. But there's
Right,
something, too,
right.
we, like, as you as Jews understand something in this world that the people in the circuses and the theaters
You
don't.
have like this deep understanding that those guys down the block, they don't have. They just have their base entertainment. Yeah.
I think it's also, as much as you might want to become part of them and think you're part of them, deep down in the hearts of hearts, they're really against you. So.
Right. I think that's really a crucial part of this, which is that there's not that much that distinguishes you guys. You look the same, they dress the same, but we're very, very different on the inside. We have this tradition of they destroyed our temple. How could we ever sit next to them in the theater and in the stadium? How could we ever laugh with them? They only want to see us destroyed. We will never be like them. Yeah.
It's very uncomfortable to sit and mourn, and somebody might be tempted to say, well, the circus is like, it's just an hour's pleasure, and it'll stop the pain for an hour, and what's the big deal anyway?
Yeah.
It'll be a little bit of fun. But they're also saying that it's not just, taking away the pain, it's actually adding to it. This is not just a matter of having a little bit of fun. I think Ms. Werheimer was saying something to this also, but that these are people who are actively trying to continue to undermine the Jews. It doesn't
Right.
matter that the Jews already lost their temple.
Right.
They're still making fun of the Jews. They're still celebrating the destruction. It's not something that was a moment in history and now we've moved on. They haven't moved on
They
either.
relive it every Tisha B'Av. And I like what Zoe said, which is that this is not a drasha for Sukkot, they chose to do this on Tisha B'Av to specifically juxtapose the fun and the levity and the lightheartedness of the non-Jews, specifically with the hardest day of the year. And that's Tisha B'Av for them. Yeah.
To say, I think that that's an important message to hear, but at the same time, I think for a non-committed Jew, I think that would be a very dissatisfying message. Like if I were not super committed to my, mourning on Tisha B'Av, and then I hear this message, I'm like, well, why am I sitting here? This kind of sucks. Like maybe I'd rather go be with them. And I don't know. I wonder what would happen to that Jew who's not really into it so much, and like maybe it kind of puts them down and saying, well, I don't want to be part of that mourning group. So I don't know, where are they in this message?
Right, it's a really good question. I hate to say there probably weren't a lot of those Jews in the ancient world where you were either a Jew or a non-Jew. Of course, there were those who were not as observant, let's say as the rabbis, like they were doing kind of like Shabbat, kosher, that was what the general Jew was doing. But everybody knew that they were a Jew, and they knew that they were different. There was no real option to, join somewhere else. Did anybody read that book, As a Driven Lead? Is that what it's called? Yeah, and that, I love that. I love how it paints the picture of Elisha ben Aboya who goes and he leaves. And my sister's reading it now, and I read it 10 years ago, so it's nice to relive it. But I don't think that was such a common thing that happened. I don't think that Jews in the ancient world had that sort of luxury and privilege to even go and join the Romans. It probably wasn't a live option for them. This was their reality, and like their only reality. Yeah.
Well, actually, what Bima was saying was reminding me of Purim and the Megillah, and it is said that there were a lot of Jews who went to Achashverosh's Seudah.
Yeah. Right. That was a very different time, right? The Persian Empire, yeah, they were very much living amongst the non-Jews in that world. Yeah.
And I don't think it's Shad especially, but I know that there's very popular midrash that it was a celebration of the anniversary of the destruction of the Beit.
Oh, I didn't.
Oh.
I was not familiar with that midrash. That
The
is.
Shanim were like actual items.
And you know what? And what does that tell you about the rabbis who wrote that midrash? It probably was not the destruction, right? But it's the same rabbis. They see the non-Jews celebrating. It always has to be related to the destruction of the temple. Why else would non-Jews celebrate? They're only celebrating our downfall. Right. Well, yeah.
And it's sort of, even like nowadays in Saturday Night Live, they had a comedian who was, there, and all these Jews were there, and he was basically, continuing the tropes against the Jews. so, you know, it happens nowadays too.
Right. It's interesting how they specifically use, it's not just that they, you know, they're sitting in their theaters and circuses, but they're making fun. This comedy, satire, mockery, it's very powerful. It's really a very powerful weapon, and the Jews recognize that. And they see that that's what is being aimed at them. Yeah, did you want to say?
Well,
Yeah.
in the Megillah, when you're talking about Purim, it's like you might talk about Simcha, Halava Simcha. So you have all of that laughter and all of that joy at the destruction
Right.
of the non-Jews.
Yeah. Yes. And that actually makes me very uncomfortable in Purim. I'll tell you, I live in Brooklyn, in New York, and there was a house that had, I don't know if they still do this anywhere, but there was like a hanging haman, like from the house. I was like, this is so uncomfortable. We're not supposed to laugh and be happy at the downfall of non-Jews, even if it was 2,000 years ago. It's very uncomfortable. But we, you know, try to see that as their joy of their predicament, and not because they're killing the 500 non-Jews in Shushan. You know, they're happy that they were able to survive. But yes, that is definitely an uncomfortable part of this. The rabbis don't even have that luxury, right? They can't even imagine fighting a war with the Romans, let's say. They don't have that military victory and vision. They only have midrash, they have the future. That's why we're talking all about the future, because that's all the rabbis have. All they have is what can happen in the world to come. I actually want to make one more comment based on what you said, which is that we spent 3 classes talking about how the rabbis laugh and make fun and do all these things. We know that the rabbis do laugh. We know that even in the Beit Midrash, where they're studying and learning, we know that they laugh at each other. And we know that they use parody and satire, which we saw in the last class. We know that they're using the tools probably of the Romans. They're using the Roman tools to entertain a crowd, but they're using it in their study of Torah. So it's an interesting juxtaposition to keep in mind, and we'll pull this together at the end. But the rabbis are saying, you know, don't be like them, don't get entertained, don't go to the theaters and circuses, we need to cry and wail and everything is sad about our lives. But we also know that they live their lives with joy and humor and comedy. But they don't say that. So why do you think they're doing that? I'll put that aside for a moment, and I want you to think about that, and we'll come back to it. Now the next source is something that I love this midrash a lot, and I want to study this in Chavruta because I really want you to get a sense of what it's saying and talk about it. This comes from a collection of midrash called Pesiktah de Rav Kahana, and this was a collection of midrashim that were said as sermons on the holidays. So this one that I brought for you was said on Yom Kippur. Now what it does is it'll start with a pasuk from Nevi'im or Ketuvim. So here it starts with a verse from Kohelet, and it's going to make its way back to the first pasuk of the reading for that day. So if you quickly flip to the very end of this midrash, it starts with Acharei Mot Shnei Bnei Aharon. That's the reading for Yom Kippur, right? The chapter 16 in Vayikra. It starts with after the death of the 2 sons of Aharon. The chapter is not about the death of Aharon's sons. The chapter is about the Seir LaAzazel, right? The goat that we send off. It's about the rituals for Yom Kippur. But the first sentence, the first pasuk is after the deaths of the 2 sons of Aharon. That's what the midrash is going to latch onto. We're going to see this character, just another word of introduction. This character is going to come up in the midrash called Midat Hadin, the attribute of justice. Who kind of works with God. You'll see, I don't know, I'm curious to know how you read it. Works with God to do things in the world. And this Midat Hadin laughs a lot. So what I want you to do is take about 10 to 12 minutes. Read the midrash. If you could read it in Hebrew, great. If not, read it in English. And I want you to think, what is the role of Midat Hadin? What is the role of this attribute of justice? This is a drasha. Is this comforting? If you were sitting in the audience, would you find this drasha comforting? Think about that. Okay, 12 minutes. I'll give a little summary of the midrash for those who maybe didn't complete it. And then I want to hear your thoughts. You know, what is laughter doing it? Is this comforting or not? Right, and so what's this midrash about? We have this idea, it starts with Lischok Amarti Meholal, and I should have given the disclaimer about the translation up front. We saw this pasuk in an earlier text, right? And the Bavli translated it very differently. It translated it as laughter is praiseworthy, based on the root of halal. However, really, a more authentic translation, and if you look it up, right, is this sort of confounding or confusion, mixed up, miholal. That's the sort of biblical way of using the term. So Kohelet is really saying, laughter is mixed up. I don't want anything to do with laughter. And joy, what does it accomplish? Kohelet is in despair. He's really down. Why do I need laughter? Why do I need joy? And by the way, according to the rabbis, who wrote Kohelet? Shlomo, right. So it makes it even stronger. What is Shlomo doing here? Right, so the first interpretation that it gives is very similar to what we just saw above. It contrasts the laughter of the non-Jews in their theaters and circuses. And the fact that Talmidei Chachamim, the scholars, should not go in there, right? That's our first interpretation of confounded laughter. Laughter that's mixed up, laughter that's confused, something negative. It's not entirely clear what that is. Now the second interpretation we get is about Shlomo. What does it say about Shlomo? That the laughter, Midat Hadin, laughed about 3 things and mixed them up, right? It's not entirely clear what's going on. But then when we read through it, we kind of get a sense. 3 things Shlomo sort of mixed up, which is to say, we have these laws about what a king is supposed to do, and Shlomo clearly did not do them. So they get turned upside down, and in the sort of midah keneged midah, God removes Shlomo from the throne. This is all in the midrash, by the way. Don't forget that, this didn't happen in the Navi. I know some people were like, I don't remember this part. And he's walking around, right? They didn't have shuls and they didn't have batei midrashot back then. So he's walking around, he's like, it's me. And all the rabbis sitting there like, no, it's not. This is what the rabbis are thinking about Shlomo. They said even a righteous person who does bad things, midat hadin is going to get him. Justice is going to get him. And it's reflected by this sort of laughter. And then I didn't bring you the next part of the midrash, but I put it in a little summary, that midat hadin also laughs at the generation of the flood and Sodom and Amorah. Because God gave them beautiful land. God gave them everything, wealth and tranquility, and then they do all these evil things, right? They sin, and then God destroys them. So that's another case where midat hadin laughs at the subversion of reality. Expectations are subverted. What you think is going to happen is not what happens. And then justice comes through and offers, gives the ultimate justice. Now the last interpretation is a little bit different. In the last interpretation, who does midat hadin laugh at? Elisheva. And why? Is a trick question. Do we know why midat hadin laughs at her? Do we know why she gets punished? No. Yeah, what did you say?
She's too happy.
So it doesn't, she is happy. Now the Midrash doesn't say because she's too happy, that's why she suffers and that's why her sons die. It's reflective of this very stark contrast, this juxtaposition. She's happy, she has these 4 huge simachot, and in another version, it says that there's 5 simachot on one day. And then her sons die. What a cruel juxtaposition. And actually, there's another part of the Midrash that I didn't bring, which brings a story about a father whose son is getting married, and his son dies on his wedding day. How sad, what a terrible, sad contrast, right? This juxtaposition of joy and mourning. That's what the Midrash is exploring. In the first part of this Midrash, right, we had example, Shlomo, the Sodom and Amorah, the flood. Those people seem to get what they deserve, right? And midat hadin laughs at them because they got, everything got turned upside down for them, but they deserved it. But the last one is different. The Midrash is not saying that Elisheva deserved what she got. The Midrash is saying that sometimes midat hadin laughs and things go upside down, and things just happen when we don't expect it. Now this is a drasha on Yom Kippur, right? What kind of message do you think that this tells the audience, the kahal, on Yom Kippur? They're sitting there and they're sitting in awe and thinking, am I going to live? Am I going to make it? What's this year going to be? Am I going to make money? Am I going to not? Am I going to learn? Will I have kids? All of these things. And what's the rabbi's message?
We don't know.
Sometimes we don't know. Sometimes justice works and sometimes it doesn't. Now, that's not so comforting. Like, I don't think I would want my rabbi to say this on Yom Kippur. But the rabbis are really grappling with their reality, with their circumstance. They're looking around them, and they're good people, but their temple was destroyed. They're living in difficult conditions. And they're really giving voice to this feeling that sometimes things don't always work out in this world. Now, if you remember, we looked at all these sources 10 minutes ago, where in the future, everything will be fine. But in this world, we don't know if everything will be fine. Now, in the last part of this, before I close up, we won't look at these sources in depth. But part 3, you can look at them on your own time. The rabbis do project their vision of God laughing. Even if the rabbis don't laugh, or they say they don't laugh, they often say that God laughs. God will laugh, in the famous Tanur Shalachnai story, right? Where there's this big conversation, and the rabbis vote by majority, even against what is considered true, and the rabbis, they win over this other person who really had truth on his side. God laughs at that. He smiles, like in a nice way, like a parent whose children, bested them. God smiles at that. They also have this vision in source 12 that God will sort of mock the non-Jews in the future. God will laugh at their inability to even perform small mitzvot. It's a little bit uncomfortable to imagine God this way. The rabbis project their visions, their ideas of the future, of theology, on God. And laughter is a very powerful mechanism to do that. God is on the Jew side. God laughs and smiles when the rabbis are involved in the halachic process, right? And in the future, God will be again on the Jew side when the non-Jews show up and they're like, where's my reward? And then God laughs at them. This is the rabbis' way of coping and seeing themselves in the future, in redemption. That allows them to keep going, right? Now, and I'll come back to the last couple of sources, as we close up, but I want to think about, all these sources that we looked at today, but also kind of the last 3 classes, which is what does this tell us about laughter and humor? In the last few sessions, we talked about how the rabbis use laughter, and in this session, we're talking about how the rabbis talk about laughter, which seems very complicated, right? Laughter tells us about justice. Laughter tells us about God's involvement in the world, that sometimes in this world, when we're just living in the world, we don't actually know why things happen, but in the future, everything will be okay. That's sort of what the rabbis are saying, and they use laughter to talk about that, to say that laughter is what sets things straight. Laughter is also what turns things upside down. Laughter has that role. It's complicated. We don't know why things ultimately happen. And the rabbis are maybe expressing some of that anxiety about how justice functions on earth. And I actually, I'll briefly go to the last 2 sources 13 and 14. Laughter is so important to the rabbis that in source 13, they even say that Rabbah, before he would start teaching halacha, he would amar milta de bedechuta. Now, this is often, if somebody's going to give a shiur about laughter, this is the source that they start with. He opens with a joke. That's like, public speaking 101. He opens with a joke, everybody's happy, and then he starts teaching. And the next source, this is the number 2 source that somebody would start with if they give a shiur about laughter. This is a very famous source in Ta'anit. That Rabbi Broka was walking in the market, and Eliyahu would appear to him. Right? And he asked Eliyahu Hanavi, is there anybody who's going to get Olam Haba in this world? So Eliyahu points to these 2 guys. So these 2 brothers. So the rabbi goes up to them and says, okay, what do they do? So he goes up to them and he says, what do you do? What is your occupation? And he said, and the guys say, Inshe Batuche Anan, Mibatrinan Atzive. We are jesters. We are people of laughs, of laughter. We cheer up the depressed. And they say, alternatively, when we see 2 people fighting, we make peace between them. Those are the only people in the entire marketplace that get Olam Haba. The rabbis see how valuable laughter is, how it can bring peace and calmness and tranquility and just, a calm mind. That's so important. That is such an important function of laughter, and the rabbis recognize that. And yet, they also use laughter to really grapple with their existential questions, to really grapple with what is God's involvement on the earth. So I want to sum up by saying, what are the goals, what are the functions of laughter? Laughter is, like we saw in the first session, right? It's an expression of hope. It's an expression of confidence, like we saw in some of these sources today about the righteous and Anikim, that they're going to be laughing in the future. That is one really important goal of laughter. It is hope. Laughter is also an expression of group identity, right? We saw that with the mockery. Laughter can tell you where you align. Who do you agree with? Who do you not agree with? It can also reveal some insecurities and anxieties. Laughter can also be a way to grapple with challenging biblical characters, right? Last week we talked about David and how they use satire to talk about the story of David. Laughter can really help the rabbis work through that story. How do we make sense of it? It's a really complicated situation, David and Bathsheba. And more personally, laughter is a way to grapple with their own lives, challenges and complexities, specifically about justice. Why do bad things happen to good people? Why is the temple destroyed and the non-Jews are sitting in peace in their theaters and circuses? Laughter is really a way to think about that. And I'm sorry I can't give you any, this is why it happens. But the rabbis, that's not what they're doing, right? They can't give you a yes or no answer. They just talk through it. They think through it. And they use these characters, Midat Hadin, God, as laughing. That helps them cope with it. The rabbis maybe say that laughter is not good and you should never laugh in this world, but we know that they do. And maybe it's helpful as a coping mechanism to say laughter will only be in the world to come. But when you're a person, when you're a human, and you need to make it through life, humor is really one of the only tools you have to deal with the stress of the world and the anxieties. So if there's anything that I leave you with after these four, it's that things are complicated. But we do know that humor and laughter are hugely important to the rabbis and to Judaism and the formation of Judaism. So I hope that you enjoyed learning with me these few sessions. And I'd love to hear questions or comments. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
I just